Let's continue. So as promised, we will now have a presentation on Duranta, the new Linux Foundation networking project. So this is a collaboration of three people. First of all, Sridhar here, who, well, now I...
in the morning, so it's okay.
Okay, well then I go quickly, but he's also, maybe the one thing that I wanted to say, you're also, I don't know how you call this, the manager of various projects. So also there's Dent, which is a networking operating system, and also eBPF, which I guess many people of you know, which is to run kernel programs safely in kernel space. Yes, so Sridhar, then also Sagar, that you all know, works at the Alliance, and myself. And yes, let's get started, the introduction to Duranta. And I give you this.
Okay.
Well, maybe just we will briefly explain about the Linux Foundation and Linux Foundation networking. This will be done by Sridhar. Sagar will present Duranta, and I will briefly go over the features and roadmap and contribution policies, which is very similar to OAI, but for the sake of completeness, we will outline all these things.
Okay. Okay. Oops. Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity again. Yeah, I think you're all familiar with the Linux Foundation. I don't want to get into details like who we are and what we are. It's the largest shared technology investment, I think, with respect to open source. We manage open source projects. There are so many domains. It's not just related to one particular domain. We have thousands of projects. Of course, the Linux kernel is our the main thing. Apart from Linux kernel, we have the thousands of projects. A lot of people in many places, they assume Linux Foundation is only about Linux kernel, but it's beyond Linux kernel also. And this is the summary of all the Linux Foundation networking projects that we have. We are on 12 active projects for now. Just to summarize, Linux Foundation is basically a foundation of foundations. Okay, within the Linux Foundation, there are multiple sub-foundations. A project or a foundation can be a funded one or an unfunded one also, right? LFN is one of the sub-foundation within the Linux Foundation. There are others. You would have heard of CNCF Foundation, LF Energy. There are various other sub-foundation within the Linux Foundation. LFN is one of the oldest sub-foundation within Linux Foundation. And each project within the LF networking, they work autonomously. So they have the full freedom to make a lot of all the decisions on their own. And it's not necessary that all networking projects within LF has to be in the Linux Foundation networking. It's their choice. There are so many projects that are related to networking. For example, as just mentioning the network OS, network operating system, right? But they don't have to be, they can choose to be, whether to be part of LFN or not. So they have that freedom. Some projects do, for example, Sonic or even the Kudu, for example, right? They're not part of LFN yet. So they can be outside LFN, and we call that as an adjacent LF projects. So what I would just like, before I pass it on to Sagar, so recently OAI moved their code base to LF networking. So it got migrated to LF networking and got renamed as Duranta. Now I would say, I mean, I can confidently say that with Duranta, it has given a new lease of life to LF networking. Because as of today, that is the most active project within LF networking also. If you see the number of contributions that are happening, how active with respect to projects, Duranta is the most active project. And it has that huge potential of bringing all this ecosystem together. So if any open source project that can bring the ecosystem together has a huge potential for long-term sustainability also. So I have a lot of hopes on this project. I'm pretty sure it will be successful. I will now pass it on to Sagar to elaborate on Duranta.
Thank you. Thanks, Sridhar. So, as an overview of Duranta, so Duranta is open source, ran in UV stack. This is developed for research, testing, and early deployments, which are actually done today with OpenAirInterface. And So it's under LFN neutral governance, structured support, in a way that now we are using a lot of Elephant tools which are being developed since ages to maintain the repository, and then, for example, for CLA signing, and then the tools for security, and then how they track the contribution from different developers, and then how developers can track their contributions as well for their own understanding. So we are using all these tools which are provided by LFN, and the mission of Duranta is actually to be the reference RAN and UV stack. So, which was actually the mission as well which has always been the mission of OpenAirInterface, to develop the reference stack, and then on top of it, people use for their research to implement some pre-standard work, so that one day it might go in standard. So same here, the mission remains the same. And then after that, there is also about the tooling and the documentation, that we make the documentation much more easier for the users to grasp, and easily, so that they can find what exactly they are looking at. So that's also now as a part of the mission itself, which also contributes to the stability, which in the morning we discussed a little bit about the stability, and so that now is a part of the mission statement, and about the progress towards deployment-ready software. So that's what also discussed in the morning, that people would like to have a stable software where it can go towards a deployment ready. So that's also part of it, that we are now more and more focusing towards stability, running long tests and testing in our labs as well, and some other community labs, so that Duranta and OAI runs as long as possible. And for the scope, so the scope firstly was to bring the seed code, the OpenAirInterface 5G repository into Duranta, bring the seed code, and then after that we will also bring the code network, the OpenAirInterface code network, also the operations and maintenance. So today, let's say in operations and management today, there is the RIC, which is also FlexRIC. If most of you would know, that's the OpenAirInterface RIC. Then there are also, let's say, for orchestration, there are Helm charts, there are Docker Compose, there are Kubernetes operators. So all of that slowly, gradually will come in by the end of this year in the Duranta project GitHub repository. And so the migration started, let's say, on the 29th of May, and 29th of May was the last release in the GitLab of OpenAirInterface 5G of OpenAirInterface 5G codebase. And that was the week 22 release of 2026. And after that, the first release of Duranta, which was done on the June 12th, that was week 24. And that's the place where we did the first release for Duranta. So, and it's Robert who's going to explain more about the release strategy. And there's another thing which I want to add, which is also, let's say, a sort of, it's also a mission of Duranta, which we are thinking about. We also discussed, which was also brought by one of our participants yesterday in the talk, that why don't we have some sort of a repository where we can put experimentations before? Because a lot of things people are not able to merge because either they are not standardized, they don't really go easily in the main code base. But the works which people do, which are not really complete, but at least they can stay somewhere, so that other people can get more, let's say, they can get empowered, and they can, it saves their time to redo the same thing from scratch. So we're gonna make another repository which is known as experimental, for example. And in that experimental repository, people can push their code, push their documentation, some slides of their work, the demo they presented in a conference, or they did it for something. And this way, the community will be able to engage even more. And if people are afraid that, okay, the code will take time to be accepted, but they can put there, because there the acceptance bar will be different. And this is to increase, let's say, I would say, the rate of innovation, so that it becomes more, so that easily the code gets in. So that is one of the, let's say, that is another additional mission which is there in Duranta. So with this, I'll pass on the mic to Robert.
Maybe just as an addendum to what Sagar just said, I think that would also help to get some exposure, kind of, as you said, for people to maybe put out the code, and then maybe they will stop at a specific place, but it will be at a central place where they could, where the work could be picked up by others, for example. So maybe somebody works on a feature, they bring it like halfway, it's maybe not good enough, or non-standard as said, but maybe people would want to actually bring this further, maybe merge parts of it, and then that might be a place where people can actually discover such. So, I already mentioned, I guess most of you know about the various features and what OAI brings, but for the sake of completeness, I wanted to summarize a little bit. I focus here on 5G, but as we already said, basically we migrated the entire code base, so also the 4G UE and the eNodeB, they are in the same repository, so all of this is also still present, but in terms of common features, so there's the operation in FR1, but also in FR2, that is maybe at a varying level of maturity in the eNodeB and the UE, but nevertheless it's there. And yeah, that comes also with the various numerologies that we support, so basically 15, 30, and 120 kilohertz sub-carrier spacing. In terms of bandwidth, the UE and the eNodeB, they support pretty much all of the bandwidths of FR1, and then also 200 megahertz for FR2. And next to 64 QAM, also 256 QAM on both sides. So then in terms of radio support, so the most common one is the RDUs RPs from National Instruments, but there are also drivers for other radios, so for Lime SDR, for Blade RF, yeah, for various split 8 options. Both the eNodeB and the UE, they support various end-to-end features, so SIP19 encoding and decoding, various HARC changes, measurements for SINR, and of course the simulation part, all of which has been contributed and also presented yesterday by Fraunhofer. The various parts, so eNodeB and the UE, they are interoperable with various third-party UEs, core networks, and also eNodeB. So in particular the eNodeB, I think you know, it works with most smartphones. It also works with most, if not all, the core networks. The UEs maybe have some problems with specific third-party eNodeBs, but it can definitely be made work. And then there is support for LDPC accelerators. I have a small typo here, there should be a look-aside accelerators. So apart from the software LDPC that is there, there's also support for the AAL, so basically for this ORAN interface based on BBDEF, and then the vRAN boost from Intel and the T2 card. And well, the upcoming thing, also the SCUDA accelerator, so that's not merged it, but that is hopefully in the final, on the final line. If we then go for the RAN, so I guess you know these numbers, so in downlink up to 1.4 gigabits, in uplink up to 400 megabits. All of this, of course, depends a little bit on the configuration of the DTD pattern and so on. On the frontal, the eNodeB also supports the 7.2 ORAN interface, and then various RUs. I guess you could also see this already at the demo stands. It also supports this intermediate mid-haul interfaces, F1, E1, and FAPI, and then I didn't explicitly put it, but also the O1 and E2 interfaces, and then soon also the E3 interface, as we have already heard. There's support for the NVIDIA Ariel L1 inline accelerator, so basically this inline accelerator where the entire L1 runs on GPU, and there's also support for 64 UEs. There was actually a demo yesterday that Karim presented, maybe I've seen it. So for the UE, well, the best throughput you get with SISO, there's experimental support for MIMO and 2 layers, so that's something that we're working on to improve this. Depending also here on the configuration and the machine, you get to these numbers. There are additional NTN features that are relevant if you want to actually connect this to a satellite. Maybe one specificity that I want to highlight is this UE FAPI interface, so basically the interface between the L1 and the L2 that is inspired by the Small SAM Forum FAPI interface, but that has already used also with third-party L1s. And yes, and also the UE, of course, supports the various procedures. The one thing that I wanted to highlight, so for the PDU sessions, you could set up IP PDU sessions, but also the Ethernet PDU sessions that was mentioned yesterday. So then I have two quick roadmaps. First for the RAN. So we are now almost at the end of Q2, but I wanted to mention, so there were a couple of things that are either merged already and work. There are a couple of things that are in preparation. You maybe have seen some of the demos yesterday. As I mentioned, the 64 UEs. There are other demos that you can also see this afternoon. For example, this CAT-A OAI ORU or NRDC support. So if we look a little bit further, we also see so the handovers over F1 and 2, so basically on one CU across multiple DUs or via the AMF that's already merged, but we're working on the XN handover support so that different CUs could talk to each other. Yesterday, Rakesh had a demo on uplink multi-user MIMO, and we will hear a bit more from Fraunhofer in a moment on that. This was also already mentioned today, the aperiodic uplink channels and so on. So, and if you go a little bit into the future, I don't want to highlight too many things, but there can be RU support, both at the DU and also at the RU is something that's upcoming, and I hope we finally gain some proper support for slicing, and of course we will look then also in digital beamforming support or multi-user MIMO towards the end of this year or next year. So at the UE, there are a couple of things, so support for handover procedures that is basically there. Maybe there are a couple of small things missing. We are just finalizing the side link procedures, so also there was a demo actually on some of this work yesterday. If we look further, so I mentioned already, so SISO supported and there's experimental multi-layer support, but we want to improve this and then also of course improve the throughput, and there's some work that is ongoing on RU sharing so that you could, for example, use the same radio card but then simulate multiple UEs on top, similar as you might also know this from the MRSF UE simulator, for example. So, and then there are also some works that are around in the community. So, for example, you maybe have already heard about the scan carrier feature that exists, but we're not as happy to fully merge this, but I think at some point it will be integrated. There are also other things that are still missing, for example, these power control procedures so that you could actually properly use this in outdoor settings. That's not yet where we want to have it, but this will come soon. So I should hurry up. Maybe for the contribution mechanism, so I guess most of you are aware that now we moved the existing code base, so it was before on the private instance of Eurocom, and it has been migrated to GitHub, but nevertheless we try to keep the overall flow, how things work, more or less the same. So the one thing that Sagar already mentioned is this EasyCLA tool that actually is quite a help for, well, the maintainers, so that we don't need to check for everybody whether they signed it or not, and then we need to ask in the team or me going to Camille again, did this person sign or not, and so on. So, but this will be shown. There were some minor adjustments that he made that people need to sign the commits and so on, and we try to encourage people to actually use forks and not add everybody, so that the repository is huge. But I think more or less these are small details, and as I said, we try to keep the workflow for the developers more or less the same. There is also a link for the contribution guidelines, so that's basically just a document that is in the repository, but I put the link here, so if you have the slides you want to read, you can read. So Sagar already mentioned and asked me explicitly to talk about the maintenance and what is the release strategy that we have. So you already know we have like this weekly integration branch, and then we actually, each week we make like a tagged version so that people have more or less a feeling of what are the different versions. If somebody said they work on week 42, then it's pretty clear from when this is and what is the feature set. What we did in the past and what we want to keep also doing is some major releases 2 to 3 times a year, so that also some, let's say, users that are a bit further away and they don't really go with this weekly flow, that they could then also use one specific release. And we are currently preparing this initial Duranta version 3.0 release, and also here we start with 3.0 so that it's clear that if we talk about 2.0, that's really the OAI version, and 3.0 is then Duranta. So we try to keep this just in line. But the rest, as I said, pretty much the same. We still use the same Jenkins infrastructure and the tests. Maybe one important thing for all the users is there. What we also decided is that the existing repository basically remains a mirror, so that people can just keep using that and not that much changes for them. So we migrated already some of the meetings to the Linux Foundation networking infrastructure. So there is a TSC call that is on all Thursdays at 5 p.m. Central European time. There are already the developer calls that we migrated, and then there are also some NTN and UE calls that we already have, and we will also migrate this soon. So here maybe just also as an overview what we test in our CI. Well, okay, there are various simulators and also just build testing, of course, and there's already the radio simulation against the Okuda GNOB that we put in place. There are various hardware-based tests, of course, with use of Ps to check various features, to test against various ORAN RUs. We have some multi-UE testing, and of course we also test against the NVIDIA Ariel L1 with either COTS UE or also with the OAI UE. So, and with that, I don't want to talk too much, do not take too much time. Thank you all for your interest. We welcome any contributions, and if there are questions, then maybe this would be the time to answer them.